Hi folks, Popmaster God here with another list. For this one we will be taking a look back at 2025 to showcase the best of the best video games released that year. Criteria is based on reviews and number of Game of the Year awards won. The following are the top 5 Game of the Year award winners. Coming in at number 5 is Death Stranding 2 on the Beach, developed by Kojima Productions and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. Death Stranding 2 was released on June 26, 2025, exclusively for the PlayStation 5 at launch. And just like the original Death Stranding, this is not an easy game to describe. Once again, you play as Sam Porter Bridges, portrayed by Norman Reedus, in a post-apocalyptic world where simply traveling from one location to another can become an adventure of its own. But Death Stranding 2 takes almost everything introduced in the original and expands on it. Traversal is still at the heart of the experience, but you now have far more options for getting around the world. New vehicles, equipment, and infrastructure give you, different ways to plan your routes, while environmental hazards can completely change the journey. And one of the biggest improvements is the combat. The original Death Stranding was sometimes criticized for its relatively limited action, but the sequel gives players considerably more weapons and freedom. Stealth is more viable, gunplay feels better, and encounters can be approached in several different ways. The world itself is also much more dynamic. Earthquakes can alter the terrain, rivers can suddenly flood, sandstorms can reduce visibility, and other environmental events can turn what looked like a straightforward delivery into a completely different challenge. But perhaps the biggest reason Death Stranding 2 received so much praise is that Kojima Productions managed to make the game more accessible without removing what made Death Stranding unique. You're still planning routes, balancing cargo, building infrastructure, and cooperating indirectly with other players through the game's social strand system. Only now, almost every part of that experience feels more refined. Then there's the presentation. The environments are spectacular. The performances are excellent. And Hideo Kojima once again delivers the kind of cinematic storytelling and bizarre imagery that you simply don't get from most games. For players who connected with the original, Death Stranding 2 felt less like a reinvention and more like Kojima Productions taking an incredibly unusual concept and finally realizing its full potential. It certainly won't appeal to everyone, but in an industry where so many games can feel increasingly familiar, Death Stranding 2 remains ambitious, strange, and unmistakably its own, and that's exactly why it became one of the most acclaimed games of 2025.
To the architect, an empty blueprint.
At number 4, we have one of the biggest surprises of 2025, Blueprints, developed by the independent studio Dogobomb and published by Raw Fury. Blueprints released on April 10th, 2025 for PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. On the surface, the premise sounds simple. You've inherited a mysterious mansion called Mount Holly, but there's a catch. To claim your inheritance, you have to discover the mysterious room 46, and the mansion only has 45 rooms. That's where things get interesting. Every time you open certain doors, you're presented with different rooms that can potentially exist behind them. Choose one, and that room becomes part of the mansion. That means you're not simply exploring Mount Holly, you're effectively building it as you explore. So the mansion resets, resources are limited, and every attempt becomes a combination of exploration, strategy, and puzzle solving. But what really, separates Blueprints from other puzzle games is the incredible depth of its mysteries. Strange picture hanging on a wall might contain a clue. A document you found hours earlier might suddenly become important. Numbers, objects, room names, and seemingly insignificant environmental details can all potentially connect to something much larger. and the game rarely tells you what matters. You're expected to observe, experiment, take notes, and eventually make connections yourself. That creates one of the most satisfying feelings a puzzle game can provide. You'll sometimes spend hours completely confused by something, only to suddenly realize that the answer was sitting in front of you the entire time, and solving one mystery often reveals another. That's why Blueprints became so addictive for many players. Finding Room 46 might technically be your objective, but eventually the mansion itself becomes the real mystery. Critics particularly praised how Blueprints combines its roguelike structure with carefully designed puzzles and environmental storytelling. It feels like part strategy game, part escape room, and part detective mystery. And despite being created by a relatively small independent developer, it earned a 92 Metacritic score, putting it among the highest rated games of the entire year. Blueprints didn't need, massive cinematic set pieces or a $100 million budget. It had one brilliant concept and the confidence to let players figure it out for themselves, and that made it one of 2025's most original games.
A house of 45 rooms.
Coming in at number 3 is Hades 2. Developed and published by Supergiant Games, Hades 2 officially left early access and launched on September 25th, 2025 for PC, Nintendo Switch, and Nintendo Switch 2. Following one of the most acclaimed roguelikes ever made was never going to be easy. Instead of simply recreating the original, Supergiant introduced a new protagonist, Melinoe, the immortal princess of the underworld and sister of the original game's hero, Zagreus. Her mission is to defeat Kronos, the Titan of Time. The basic formula remains familiar. You battle through constantly changing environments, collect upgrades from the gods, develop new character builds, and inevitably die before starting another run. But dying isn't really failure in Hades, it's progression. Characters remember your previous attempts, new conversations appear, relationships develop, and the story continues even when a run ends. Hades 2 takes that brilliant structure and dramatically expands it. Melinoe's combat style feels noticeably different from Zagreus. Magic plays a much larger role, and the addition of Omega abilities gives you powerful, enhanced versions of attacks, specials, and spells. Combine those abilities with different weapons and boons from the gods, and individual runs can play completely differently depending on the build you create. That's one of the things Supergiant does exceptionally well. You're constantly encouraged to experiment. An ability that initially looks useless can suddenly become incredibly powerful when combined with the right boons. But Hades 2 isn't great simply because of its combat. Supergiant once again manages to make repeating the same basic gameplay loop feel meaningful because practically everything feeds back into the story. Returning from a failed run means new conversations, characters react to events, relationships change. The world progresses alongside you, and with an enormous cast inspired by Greek mythology, there's always another character or piece of dialogue waiting to be discovered. Then there's the presentation. Supergiant's hand-painted artwork is instantly recognizable. The voice acting gives every god and mythological character a distinct personality, and the soundtrack once again perfectly complements the speed and intensity of combat. The original Hades was already considered one of the greatest roguelikes ever made. Hades 2 had the incredibly difficult job of following it, and rather than simply giving players more Hades, Supergiant expanded the combat world and mythology enough to make the sequel feel like its own game. So for many critics and players, they didn't just match the original, they surpassed it in almost every way.
Now go. Death to Kronos.
Death to Kronos.
At number 2 is Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2, developed by Warhorse Studios and published by Deep Silver. Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2 released on February 4th, 2025 for PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. And while most medieval RPGs give you dragons, magic, and supernatural abilities, Kingdom Come takes a very different approach. There are no dragons here. You're Henry of Skalitz, the son of a blacksmith, trying to survive in 15th century Bohemia during a brutal civil war. And the game's obsession with historical authenticity influences almost everything you do. Combat is deliberately challenging. Your equipment matters. Your appearance affects how people react to you. Even being dirty, bloody, or dressed like a nobleman can influence how characters perceive Henry. But what really makes Kingdom Come special is how much freedom the game gives you to handle situations your own way. A quest that appears to require combat might be solved through persuasion. You might sneak into a location instead. You could steal something you need, or you might discover an entirely different solution simply by talking to the right person. And sometimes doing something completely unexpected actually works. The world reacts to your behavior as well. Commit crimes and witnesses can report you. Get caught stealing and your reputation can suffer. Walk into one of certain situations wearing the wrong clothing or carrying the wrong reputation, and conversations can unfold differently. That unpredictability makes the world feel less like a collection of scripted quests and more like a place you're actually inhabiting. And the side quests deserve special mention. Instead of simply filling the map with repetitive activities, many of them tell surprisingly elaborate stories with multiple outcomes and memorable characters. You can begin what sounds like a completely ordinary task and somehow end up involved in a situation you never expected. That's where Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2 is at its best. It creates stories through the combination of scripted writing and player freedom. And unlike the original game, which was praised for its ambition but criticized for technical problems and clunky mechanics, the sequel arrived as a far more polished experience. Critics rewarded it with an 89 Metacritic score, and it became one of the most celebrated RPGs of the year. Kingdom Come doesn't make Henry a superhero or a legendary chosen one. He's an ordinary person living through an extraordinary period of history, and by combining that grounded perspective with an incredibly reactive open world, Warhorse created one of the most immersive RPGs in years.
But once you've chosen the path of adventure, you have to fight.
You should never have come. You're only going to make things worse for everyone.
No. She chose to come.
And at number 1 by an absolutely enormous margin is Clair Obscur: Expedition 33, developed by French studio Sandfall Interactive and published by Kepler Interactive. Expedition 33 released on April 24th, 2025 for PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. The game takes place in a surreal fantasy world inspired by Belle Epoque France. Every year, a mysterious being known as the Paintress paints a number onto a giant monolith. Everyone who has reached that age disappears. This year, she's going to paint the number 33. You follow the members of Expedition 33 as they set out on what is essentially a suicide mission. Reach the Paintress and kill her before she can paint again. It's an incredible premise, but what initially attracted players with its art direction quickly revealed itself to be much more. One of the game's greatest achievements is its combat system. At its core, Expedition 33 is a turn-based RPG. You choose attacks, abilities, and items like you would expect, but when the enemy attacks suddenly, you're actively involved. You can dodge attacks, jump over certain moves, and with precise timing, parry them. Successfully learning an enemy's attack pattern can completely change a battle, and because parrying can lead directly into powerful counterattacks, combat begins to feel like a mixture of a traditional JRPG and an action game. The character building system adds even more depth. Different weapons, abilities, and passive effects allow you to create incredibly powerful combinations, and every party member has mechanics that make them play differently. So despite being turn-based, combat rarely feels passive, but the gameplay is only half of what made Expedition 33 special. Without getting into spoilers, this is a story heavily focused on grief, mortality, family love, and what people are willing to do when they can't accept loss. And it isn't afraid to take its characters into some extremely emotional places. The performances are excellent. The world is visually stunning. And then there's the soundtrack. Composer Lorien Testard's music became one of the most celebrated parts of the entire game, transforming everything from quiet emotional scenes to enormous boss battles. What's perhaps most impressive is the scale of the achievement. This wasn't the latest installment in a 20-year-old franchise. It was Sandfall Interactive's first game, yet critics praised its writing, combat, art direction, performances, and music at a level normally reserved for the industry's most established studios. Expedition 33 managed to feel nostalgic and completely new. At the same time, you can see the influence of classic Final Fantasy and other turn-based RPGs throughout it, but Sandfall didn't simply recreate those games. They took that foundation and built something distinctly their own. And when Game of the Year voting began, the result wasn't particularly close, clair obscur. Expedition 33 didn't simply become one of the best games of 2025, it became the game that defined the year.
Let's celebrate.
Do you agree with these results? Any underrated games that released in 2025 that deserve more love? Let me know in the comments. I may do a series focused on the top underrated games depending on demand. As always, thank you for watching. See you on the next one.